morning, everyone. So for our next panel, and this is more of a panelist, the title of the panel discussion is Camp Lejeune and New Theories of Liability. We're pleased to welcome first-time speaker and founding partner of DiCello Levitt, Mark DiCello. DiCello Levitt has offices in Birmingham, Chicago, Cleveland, New York, Washington, D.C., and San Diego. And they're known for its integrity and experience devoting itself to justice for clients, large and small, through class actions, business litigations, personal injury cases, and whistleblower advocacy. So with that, Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, everybody. So my co-founding partner, Adam Levitt, and good friend Michael London are tied up in travel related, so I apologize on their behalf. So I've done quite a bit of speaking at Camp Lejeune, and I know everyone here has seen advertisements for Camp Lejeune constantly. And when I'm asked to speak about Camp Lejeune, I look at who the audience is going to be, and I try to craft something for the audience, and I don't know what the hell to say to this audience. And the reason is because typically, I would say no to this because I would be looking at people that I'm going to be defending this, they're going to be defending the case, so I had no interest in sharing anything. But this is a case that's being defended by the U.S. government. And maybe at some point they hire private counsel if they can get it together. And I'll explain why they, or what they haven't done to get it together. But the first thing I want to talk about is actually the significance of Camp Lejeune, the litigation statute. And to put it in perspective, it starts out as, for us, it's an environmental case, and my firm has an environmental litigation section. So we handle these cases. It comes in as an environmental case because it involves the poisoning of a massive number of people. And we're talking hundreds of thousands. In fact, I think the actual number of people that went through Camp Lejeune during the period that this covers, and that is 1953 to 1987, it's over 1 million people. And those 1 million people, including service members, and that's usually what people equate to Camp Lejeune, it's the soldiers, it's the Navy. But it's their wives, it's their children, it's the employees, it's people in the community who also have to work at Camp Lejeune. And what was it that those 1 million plus people were exposed to? Well, they were exposed to volatile organic compounds, which doesn't mean a hell of a lot to a lot of people until you start talking about words like perchloroethylene, PCE, trichloroethylene, TCE, benzene, and vinyl chloride. Now, all four of those substances are just awful. If you look at the agencies, and one of them for the government is the ATSDR, that's been studying these chemicals for years and years and years and years, have come up with 16 really, really signature horrible diseases. And those diseases are, they're so bad, quite frankly, that for any of you that represent, and all of you represent major corporations, you would be looking at criminal indictments for what the U.S. government knew was going on. And what did they know was going on? I can tell you that we know the levels of those four chemicals in the groundwater, from the water supplies at Camp Lejeune, every day from 1953 to 1987. That's horrible. This isn't looking back and saying, shit, we had this problem. This is, we're monitoring it, it's bad, we're not fixing it, 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 and people are dying. And there's even a cemetery outside of Camp Lejeune. There's a name for it, I'm blanking on it now, but there's so many babies, stillborns, and babies that were alive a short amount of time. There were so many of them, they started burying them on top of each other. So when families are trying to find those loved ones, they just go to a general place. So, and that's not because these women weren't healthy, it's not because of bad medical care, it's because they were poisoned. And And when people, so there's two Marines, Mike Partain and Jerry Ensminger, who kind of spearheaded and another, Freshwater, Miss Freshwater, sort of represent her. She's a wonderful woman. These two Marines, these three of them are just warriors themselves, trying to uncover what was happening at Camp Lejeune over the years, and they all lost loved ones. It was all a brutal journey for each one of them. And when they finally get people to listen, like John Stewart and other advocates, finally it starts getting airtime. But what people don't know is that there's a history of lawyers fighting for the victims of Camp Lejeune, starting around 2000, well, earlier, but 2010, 12, there's some more legislation, 2016. There's litigation that's dismissed at big MDL. But the issue was lawyers saying, look, we need benefits for these people. You did it. The government saying, well, great, but the statutes ran, there's statutes proposed that are in play, all the cases get dismissed, and now there's a public outcry. To the government's credit, they admitted it by passing this legislation. They admitted what they did. And what is this legislation? What is the PACT Act? I mean, it's kind of simple. It's a non-liability statute. It's a presumptive statute that says if you're on Camp Lejeune for 30 days or more, your disease is presumed to have been caused by these four chemicals. Now that's really good for plaintiffs' lawyers. It's kind of good adjacent for plaintiffs' lawyers. And the reason I say that is because the big problem, I shouldn't say big problem, one of the challenges is, on that level, there are different places where you could live on the base during any of those years, and they had different water supplies. And those different water supplies were monitored. And those two areas were an area called Hadnot Point and Terra Terrace. And each one would have, again, Terra Terrace may have benzene or levels of trichloroethylene that are awful, or vinyl chloride, and the other location may have a different combination of chemicals in different years. So the defense, if you guys are all defending the cases, the light bulb goes off and you say, well, I need to know where you live. Because if you have a benzene-related disease in 1972, you better have lived at Terra Terrace and had not point, because I'm going to defend this case on the notion that you live in the wrong spot. And of course, crafty plaintiffs' lawyers say, wait a minute, this is a vast base. And this is happening in the 70s and the 80s. There's no bottled water. There's water buffaloes. There's hoses. There's buckets. But people are drinking water all over the base. They're washing their cars, they're taking showers, they're doing things, they're getting their hair cut, they're doing all of they're ingesting these chemicals through mist, through absorption, through all of these things. So our point is, it doesn't matter where you live. If we look at industrial engineering, we can show that 80% of the people would have ingested enough water at any time to get the full effect of the whole base, no matter where you live. But that's becoming an issue of defending the case. Now, why is that an issue? Well, the other issue is these cases stop in 1987. They begin in 1953. So the challenge we have is, have any of you ever defended a case where someone got sick in 1953? Not hard. I want to be on your side. Because I'm going to have to show where somebody lived. An 18-year-old in 1953 is 88. My father is 78. He still comes to the office. And when he comes to the office, he forgets what he said. I love my dad. He comes in, drops bombs on people, and leaves. And then he'll come in the next day, and then he will forget what he did and do it again. But he does have 2 or 3 good hours in the day where he is on point. Another 10 years, if I'm asking him where he was in 1953 at any point, and who his friends were, and where he may have gotten a glass of water, it's going to be impossible, or at least very, very difficult. Then the question is, what's the corroborating testimony? Who the fact witnesses from 1953, if we're looking at causation issues? And so what you would say is, what about the government? Don't they have this information? Do they have the information where somebody lived? Do they have the information on the banks? What data did they maintain that would answer these questions? And the answer is they maintain a lot of stuff that is not in digital form. And the different, one of the beauties of HIPAA is that there is no beauty of HIPAA, by the way. It's bullshit. When everyone steps on that and says, look, we can't give information because of HIPAA, the government, they separate all the groups and they want to maintain compliance and not share information. So when this happens, this legislation, we are filling out forms, and I can tell you the numbers doesn't matter, but filling out a form, for instance, to say, I need the information for where you lived in 1953. And then, but the problem is I've got 10,000 clients. And the office that's answering those questions or responding to those forms, and this isn't even an exaggeration, last count had 10 people employed to do that. So it's this massive effort to now get this information so that we can prosecute cases. And then if you're defending the case, you're right to say to the plaintiff, where's your information? But then I'm right to say, it's in your filing cabinet. And then you say, but we're overworked. And I say, have you seen my office? So now we're in this vortex of how do you push these cases? How do you get to a place where we do what God intended, which is find justice as lawyers? And if you look at the statute, the mandate of the statute, it's not explicit until you read the statute. Here's what I mean. This is a statute, and I think to loop it back, I said there are a couple of things that we're concerned about. The statute's a great statute, but it creates an exclusive jurisdiction in one courthouse in the Eastern District of North Carolina. Does anyone, by the way, practice in the Eastern District of North Carolina? You do. Did you raise your hand? You missed and then right there? Said, no, okay, you were just like scratching. So, no one practices there. They do, but it's not a place where we all go because I think there's been a total of like nobody else. So there's 4 judges. And there's at least going to be 200,000 claims. Now, I didn't love civil procedure in law school. It wasn't that was a hard class to get to. But I remember things like remand. It doesn't happen here. This is not an MDL. This is an exclusive jurisdiction. I remember what that meant too. It's an exclusive jurisdiction in a small courthouse in a place that's hard to, well, it's in Raleigh, which it's Raleigh. It's 4 judges. So unless you have a plan for 10,000 years of litigation, you've got to settle these cases. So the sort of disconnect for the clients and the public is, well, when you tell the clients or a civilian what this actually means, they don't actually understand it. They don't think that this is how justice should be served in this country. They believe that we as lawyers are able to go and get things done. But we have to tell them, here's the problem. 4 judges, typical federal judge does, 4.5 to 5 civil trials a year. And the rest is criminal and everything else. I did the math before. It's staggering how impossible this is to get through. And so when Congress passes a law where they admit liability, and they admit, the diseases that they know they're copying to are absolutely awful. And then And oh, by the way, just to inform you, when it's a liability statute, there's no punitive damages, because that's what the statute also does. You don't get to talk about what the government did, because it's presumptive. So good defense lawyers say, on the government side, yeah, we did that. And you're never talking about it. Ever. And the judge says, they're kind of right. I mean, I don't care what they knew. The statute that says, if you live there, there's a presumption. So why are you going into the bad conduct? There's no punities. It's not negligence. It's just a fact. So move on. So there is this disconnect between being able to really defend these cases and then the government saying, we're putting it in a jurisdiction where there's only 4 judges. Unless we believe that we were going to put these poor people in a courtroom where nothing would ever happen, if we were going to bury them in a small courthouse in nowhere, USA, this is a statute that does it. If we're trying to actually help people, if we're trying to actually admit to what we did, then this has to be a statute where the mandate is resolve cases. And if we're resolving cases, then we need cooperation. And now we're talking to the US government. And that becomes a brutal endeavor, not because I started out as a prosecutor. So my favorite job in the world, if I would have made any money, I probably would still be a prosecutor. But there isn't the greatest level of coordination. There isn't efficiencies that we have to all deal with in our own firms. It's the government. So that explains why, in our first hearing on Camp Lejeune, the judge, Judge Dever, opened with a half-hour, 45-minute lecture on the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. And he asked Adam Bain from Department of Justice, the lawyer on the case, if he knew how long the Roman Empire lasted. And Adam, great guy, said, I just didn't prepare for that question. So the judge said, well, and he told him it was for about 1,000 years, 1,016 years, which would be the first 10% of the Camp Lejeune cases to try. And he then was really critical of the Navy. He asked how many cases are in the administrative process. The statute says you have to file administratively first. Well, there's, I think, 20,000 cases now. And those have been on file since this past August. Now, with 20,000 cases and the entirety of the Navy JAG and their administrative people, they have started negotiations in exactly as many cases as I've settled with each of you today. So, the judge seemed really concerned that the U.S. Navy hasn't taken measures to settle anything. In defense of them, I don't think they have the personnel, I don't think they're prepared for the statute. I don't know how quickly they can mobilize for this. I mean, anecdotally speaking to my clients who serve in the military, they like to point out that we can send an entire army across the Atlantic Ocean in 2 weeks or less. So why can't we negotiate cases? And the answer is because we don't care about negotiating cases, we care about war. So you're a hero, I guess, if you never get sick and you never get hurt and you do great heroic things. Otherwise, we've now gotten to a point where the major press on Camp Lejeune is probably nothing that I've just talked about. The major press on Camp Lejeune is how much are the lawyers making? The major press is potentially is legal or is litigation funding being used. I've been in courthouses around the country where defense firms talk about funding, and I know why they do. I know why you would do it, I would do it. But in this context, from our perspective, it's really sort of disgusting Because the truth is, when you're talking about people from their mid-50s to their mid-80s, reaching them to tell them that their death of their wife, their father, their mother, their children, was because you were poisoned, seems like a pretty noble thing to do. There would probably, I mean, if we're really being stand-up Americans, we should probably ask the government to go through their records of every single person that lived there and hand deliver them a document that says, here's the claim form you should fill out if you get any of these diseases. Because when you injure and kill over 100,000 people, that wouldn't be too much to ask. So instead of looking at solutions like that, some in the Senate are saying this advertising has to stop. I don't know why though. It's not like the cases where you all tell me it's in hips or mesh or whatever, you don't have a case. We all agree we have a case. And senators, you even passed a law that said there is a case. Now, the legislative response is, we want to cap your fees, lawyers are going to make too much money, and then Senator Sullivan is proposing legal fees down to 10%. And the reason I mention that, and look, a lot of us, it's not about the money anymore, we've done pretty well. The issue is, what does that mean to the injured people? What does it really mean? What it means is, none of your firms would ever be retained on a 10% deal in this litigation. And the reason you wouldn't be is because you know what I just told you. You're going to be doing case work, investigation, on a case that starts in the 50s. You're going to be looking at documents and you're going to be doing discovery in ESI with an organization that hasn't digitized everything. You're going to combine the analog world of tobacco and breast implants with today's digital world of how we work cases. We're going to have to go and find witnesses. We're going to have to find records. We're going to be finding death certificates. And we're going to be talking about presumptions for people that may have died 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. We're going to be talking about latency periods of diseases that come from horrible chemicals where the latency, you all know what latency is, right? It's going to be a certain amount of time between when you're exposed and when the disease happens. If it's too long, the defense is, great, you're outside the latency period. By the way, on that note, and to make that point, you all remember The Wizard of Oz? Right? Well, remember there's a scene where Dorothy is on the Yellow Brick Road, it's snowing. Believe me, there's a scene, especially for you guys who think it's, I don't watch it. It's asbestos. Hollywood used asbestos for snow. So we have a Hollywood movie where all those characters are being, and by the way, those scenes took weeks to shoot, right? So they were having asbestos on their heads. If that happened today, we'd be looking at medical monitoring and all of that. If it happens back then, how do you get the medical records? So I have the evidence now. I have all of these people with freaking asbestos in their hair. And now I have people coming to my office say there's the Wizard of Oz Act of 2023. Well, now I'm going to be told that, well, so-and-so died in 1972. I think it was lung disease. Have any of you tried to get medical records from 1972? Have you tried to get your birth certificates? Have you tried to get anything other than your birth certificates? It's really, really hard. So for these, even if we have the documentary evidence of a Hollywood movie showing people exposed, we have to get the records. And we have to figure out, if we don't have those records, how do we prove that out? And so, in the modern era of litigation, which is always, It's epidemiology, oncology, and all of the other things, and the films, and the x-rays, and the nurse's notes, and the doctor's notes, and then when you're defending the case, you hone in on inconsistencies. So again, why do I mention that? We're in this unique case where the government is admitted to injuring and killing well over 100,000 people, and the defense is, you don't have the information. But we did the right thing, and we're going to reduce fees, and we're going to make a big deal about how the lawyers are behind this. And if you feel that way, you should go see the cemetery. If you feel that way, you should talk to my clients. Because this is real. And the defense of this stuff is real. So the question is, what do we do about it? So I've been a lawyer, I think, and the truth is I have been a lawyer who's started negotiations with the government, and they're doing a pretty good job of being responsive, and I think there's a path to resolving these cases. But this does represent an environmental disaster that is as big as Kerr-McGee, bigger than Kerr-McGee. That was a Jerry Spence's big nuclear power case in the 70s, where Karen Silkwood was murdered. There was a movie about her, and Kerr-McGee. By the way, Jerry Spence got a $10 million verdict in that case, which nobody cares about today. Wouldn't make news in your local newspaper, and that was a global news story. So the U.S. government has done far worse to the people, to the soldiers of Lejeune and their families, and all we're talking about is their litigation funding and what are the fees of lawyers. So this was supposed to be a panel discussion, so I kind of threw this together pretty quickly when I realized my friends couldn't be here. So I'm curious from the group, so I don't just keep droning on and on. Do you guys have any questions about anything that I've said? Yeah.
How does the rules of discovery apply to these types of litigation? Because if I was litigating everything, the amount of sanctions that would pile up would essentially result in just winning outright.
I totally agree. So the issue becomes identifying what information the government had. Like I think your point is, if you're running a litigation team and a settlement team, then if I'm litigation counsel, then I'm going to be talking to the government about where's this information. Motion to compel. The judge is going to be saying, well, give them more time. They're not going to end up being able to get the information. So then you would want the sanction of essentially of what, right? I mean, you're going to want the sanction of being, okay, your case is your case, and it's not, now you're going to essentially be in default government, because without this information, it's going to be incremental, but that's how you want it to end up. The issue becomes, politically, would that happen? Would the bench have the courage, would the government, how does that all play out? And even if the government can get it, the other challenge is, what about the lack of medical records? Because I started out as just an injury lawyer, and I can tell you that hospitals, and they don't keep medical records for more than 5 to 7 years. The government keeps more records, but when somebody leaves the military, they have VA benefits. Any of you guys ex-military? So if you are, and then you go to law school and you get a job at any of our firms, you're going to be able to use your VA benefits, but you won't use them. And the VA is not where people go to get the best care. I mean, that's just a fact. So a lot of the people left the military and just did 2 years with their families. They got jobs. If they got jobs with benefits, and they're in the auto industry, steel industry, they all did pretty well. So they just got health care the way everybody did. So they might go back to the VA later, but the ship has sailed for the medical records. So that becomes really, really difficult. So the challenge then is, and let me say this too, right? I mean, Have any of you guys defended a mass store? Get it together. They're great cases for both sides. And it's really a lot of work. Most of the stuff you hear about, hip cases, for instance, every manufacturer had its own MDL. So Stryker had its MDL for the rejuvenant. But Stryker also had an MDL for the V40. J&J had an MDL for mesh products, the multiple MDLs. The reason I'm saying is that when we're doing this, the cleanest way to get to a just result is one signature disease. So if you look at the hormone replacement stuff, YAS and birth control cases, you're looking at cerebral, or I should say cardiovascular events, but then you hone those down and maybe there's a gallbladder issue like YAS. But you've got, for every disease that's akin to being poisoned, it's an oncologist, it's an epidemiologist, it's a pathologist, so for each one of those, now imagine you guys are defending the case, and I'm coming in with 41 diseases. And now you're going to be preparing for an epi cross. And you're going to look at this epidemiologist and everything he's done, or she's done, you're going to see what he or she's done in our litigation. And then you're going to see if maybe they've written something that goes against another epidemiologist in an adjacent disease, and now you're going to run them up on that. And by the way, because there's no remand, what happens with the dog? I mean, I shouldn't say that, just no remand, there isn't a state court play either. So you're just in one courthouse. If there's a bad dogger ruling and a case comes in with that disease, and the dogger ruling is because plaintiffs' counsel did whatever, you got a real hard time with the rest of that line of cases, right? So yeah, we can get the government sanction, I think we will, but how far will that go? And how much latitude will it be given? And I'm a former prosecutor, and I don't think I'm being too cynical. I just know that as a young lawyer who, there's a great line from the show Ozarks, and the main character says, I don't know. I didn't know that when I was in the prosecutor's office. And I had judges and their law clerks call me to write orders. And he just gave me an order on this suppression motion. He's giving me an order on this. My concern is that the government gets more latitude than maybe anybody else. Again, which is ironic because the clients say we were the military. Yes?
So you mentioned that you see a path to success here for the plaintiffs.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? What is the path?
That's a great question. It's almost like you were reading my notebook, because I forgot that. That's exactly what I. So keep paging through as I answer. So the judge and the DOJ, when I first went there, talking about the Hellerstein model to resolve these cases. They like the Hellerstein model. Hellerstein is the judge behind the 9/11 settlement. So Hellerstein, brilliant judge, he was very frustrated after about 2 or 3 years of a bit of a slog. Got everybody into a room and pushed a model that was actually very, very effective. It's about 15 years old. So when DOJ said they preferred Hellerstein, we hired the architects of that model. By we, I mean, and then started putting together what that means today. So it's not Hellerstein 2.0, it's like Hellerstein 10.0. So you set up a model, and now instead of just plugging in the limited number of diseases, there's only 10,000 cases for 9/11, but instead of just plugging that in, we're using AI and other things to access information and come up with some cleaner values. So I think we can do it, and I think, so the other issue is The signature diseases that we would call in our industry would be the ATSDR diseases. Those are the diseases the federal government studied and concluded are caused, more likely than not, caused by these 4 chemicals. But here are the weaknesses of that. I don't know if any of you women have ever heard of this before, but your health issues are not as important as mine. It's fact. If I'm in pain and it happens to be with my man parts, we get more care. You don't. ATSDR, and I learned that, by the way, in the mesh litigation. I led an MBL in mesh litigation. So that was the real awakening to women's issues are brushed aside usually. Well, when the government was looking at or asked to study breast cancer, there's not that many women in the military. They weren't thinking about the wives that were being poisoned. So there's not really the looking into the women's issues, the women's reproductive issues. Now we know that babies are coming out with organs on the outside of their bodies, they're coming out without limbs, and they're dead. We don't really think about what the greater impact on the women's reproductive system would be, so we don't have those studies of those chemicals by the 80s. So that's one of the things that is really a concern to us, that you're looking, I mean, when you just focus there, you're focusing on what they were looking at, and then you have to ask yourself, well, that's not really what we should be doing, is it? Isn't it their methodology? So just like when we write, I don't write expert reports. When you're submitting expert reports, or you're doing a cross-examination, it's the basis for the report. So it's always the basis, right? So the basis for the ATSDRs is what they study, the journals, and what results in their conclusion that this is a strong enough basis for a finding. So we think there's probably 41 total diseases that would qualify under their methodology for compensable diseases right now. And that's right now. I think there's probably more than that, but the work just hasn't been done by the government. And that may be a shock to you, but they don't always do the best work when it comes to trying to prove their own liability. So how long are they supposed to go? I can do all kinds of stuff. So as we're going forward, the judge has issued orders that look like pretty typical MDL orders. So there's going to be leadership papers that are going to be due no later, I think, than May 26th. We're going to continue to work on resolving the case. We're going to continue on trying to form the collaborative efforts that we need to form. And look, when I give these talks, I am frustrated by where we are. I'm not frustrated though with the people at Maine Justice. You know, they weren't thinking about this case. They weren't thinking about these records. I apologize for anybody who's defending 3M, but this isn't, we know there's documents and, this is a problem, and how do we deal with this in discovery? This is just the government doing its thing, monitoring toxins, being sort of disconnected, and finally admitting to what they did. So I can't be, and by the way, the statute's written, it doesn't even pay for me to be pissed off because I can't cross somebody and say what you knew. Because the statute says I can't. So I can't do any of that. I have to be sort of honestly grateful that this country recognized what happened at Camp Lejeune. The horrible, nasty secret is the number of other bases that did the same thing. So here's where I will be cynical. I don't know that the U.S. government, I don't know that there's a will to actually help the people that they poison. Because there's other bases that have a very similar situation that happened with Camp Lejeune. So my concern is no matter what we do, there'll be a political finger pointing that we didn't do it well enough. And the response won't have anything to do with my life. It'll have to do with the lives of people who are injured and killed at other bases from really bad conduct that was known at the time. So my cynicism is that all of the political jockeying is just to protect the fisc. And my cynicism is we'll send the Army, Navy, the military across the world in a day. We'll do $1 trillion COVID relief. We'll give $50 billion to a flu shot every year for 3 years. Without, and that goes to 3M, that goes to J&J, Moderna and Pfizer, right? So I think they've spent over $100 billion on the vaccine. And that's with all the hype. And I've had all the vaccines and the boosters, and I've had COVID 3 times. So thank you. But we won't set aside a third of that money for the military. But if there's another COVID, we'll do it. I guess we'll shut everything down again. We'll deal with it. If there's another war, we'll just spend $1 trillion and we'll deal with it. But when it comes to these injured people, who are real people, we'll figure out a way to make it hard. We'll delay it, we'll fuck with it, and then maybe a lot of them will die, and then we can settle those cases cheap. So again, to me, there is an element in this business of, on a mass tort, bad engineering, it's negligence. It's just, despite best efforts, the product wasn't good, and the best efforts of one person combined with the not best efforts of somebody else, but it's a negligence claim. What seems intolerable is this isn't a negligence claim on its best day. This is intentional, this is hiding stuff. And again, all the public seems, or all that people seem to care about is how much money we may or may not make, and then if those commercials really aren't money. It's more annoying if you have bladder cancer, breast cancer, Parkinson's, liver cancer, lung cancer, testicular cancer, multiple myeloma, any number of other autoimmune disorders, scleroderma. That's a bigger problem. It's a bigger problem if your mom and dad died. It's a bigger problem if you've had a double mastectomy. It's a bigger problem if you've had a complete oophorectomy. If your brother died, if your sister died. And we have people who've lost literally everybody to these diseases. And there's even a joke when you go to that area of the world that the people just seem different. Well, yeah, it's like going to a poor community. From Cleveland, go to a poor community. Sorry to say, you're going to have kids that were exposed to lead paint. And they're going to have neurocognitive disorders that other kids aren't going to have. And when you see a population of people affected like that, it's significant. So, what did we learn today? Lawyers are good. Volatile organic chemicals are really bad. So, going forward, we really hope that the work that we're doing will result in not just some degree of justice for these people, but also a methodology to solve other of these environmental toxic torts or toxic issues. So, if anyone has any questions, go ahead.
Yeah, Mark, from a practitioner's perspective, can you talk a little bit, you mentioned the challenges of this being based solely in the Eastern District of North Carolina. And for those of us that have some of these cases, one of the biggest challenges is the Pro Hoc Vice limitations. And I think it's 3 cases that we're limited to Pro Hoc in on, meaning if you've got 2,000